Maeglin. To understand the worst betrayal in the history of the Elves, you first have to understand what was being betrayed. Gondolin was the greatest and most secret of all the hidden Elven kingdoms, a city of white towers raised in a ring of mountains, so perfectly concealed that Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, spent centuries hunting for it and never found so much as a road that led there. It was the last great stronghold of the Noldor in the world, and for as long as it stayed hidden, it stood. Maeglin was one of its lords, the son of the king's sister, a gifted smith and a respected voice in the councils of the city, a prince of Gondolin who had everything a person of his age could want. But he carried two poisons in his heart, and he could not put either of them down. The first was love. He loved Idril, the daughter of the king, and Idril was his own first cousin. She did not return that love. She could not. Among the Eldar, such a union was unthinkable, and beyond that she simply did not want him. And the second poison grew directly out of the first. As the years passed, and Idril married a mortal man named Tuor, and bore a son, Maeglin's unreturned love slowly curdled into something colder. Resentment, a quiet, patient hatred of the life he had been denied. Now, Gondolin had one law above all others, one rule that kept the entire kingdom alive. No one was to pass beyond the encircling mountains. The safety of the city depended on absolute secrecy, and every soul within it knew it. Maeglin broke that law. He went out alone into the mountains to mine for ore, defying the king's command, and out there, beyond the protection of the walls, he was taken. Morgoth's servants dragged him down into the pits of Angband and set him before the Dark Lord himself. And Morgoth, who could read the weaknesses of a heart the way other beings read a page, saw exactly what Maeglin was. He did not need to torture him. He offered him a bargain instead. Reveal the location of Gondolin and the secret paths into it, and when the city fell, Maeglin would be given lordship over it, and he would be given Idril. Maeglin agreed. He handed over the one secret his entire people had died to protect, and Morgoth let him go home to wait. And when the assault finally came, it came with full knowledge of every wall and every gate and every hidden way. Gondolin, which had stood unconquered for centuries, burned in a single night. Balrogs and dragons and orcs poured through defenses that had been betrayed from within, and thousands were slaughtered in the streets of the most beautiful city the Elves ever built. And in the chaos of the burning, Maeglin came for his prize. He seized Idril and her young son and tried to throw the boy from the high walls to his death. But Tuor, Idril's husband, found him in the act, and in the fight that followed, he lifted Maeglin bodily and cast him down from those same walls, and Maeglin fell the full height of the city and broke upon the rocks below. He had been a lord of the greatest refuge in the world, and he gave it away, every tower and every life inside it, for a woman who would never love him and a crown he held for less than a night. Gríma Wormtongue. Some betrayals are a single decision made in a single moment. Gríma's was the opposite. His was a betrayal that happened slowly, one whisper at a time, until there was almost nothing left of the man doing the whispering. Gríma was an advisor to Theoden, the king of Rohan. He stood at the right hand of the king and was trusted with the king's ear, which in the halls of Rohan was one of the most powerful places a man could stand. And he sold it. Saruman, the corrupted wizard scheming in his tower to the north, got to him. We are never told the exact price. Some accounts point to promised power, some to promised wealth, and running underneath all of it was Gríma's hopeless, consuming desire for Éowyn, the king's niece, whom he could no more have than Maeglin could have Idril. Whatever the currency, Gríma was bought, and once he was bought, he went to work on the mind of his own king. Day after day, he leaned close and poured poison into Theoden's ear, magnifying every fear, feeding every doubt, slowly convincing a strong king that he was old and weak and finished. Under that constant murmuring, Theoden withered. He aged before his time. He sank into his throne like a man decades older than he was, staring at nothing while his kingdom decayed around him and his enemies gathered at his borders. And Gríma made sure it stayed that way. He worked to keep the king's best men away from him and engineered the imprisonment of Éomer, one of Rohan's finest warriors, precisely because Éomer saw him clearly. He kept the king isolated and blind, exactly as Saruman needed him to be. Everyone in Meduselt, the golden hall of Rohan, could see what he was. They called him Wormtongue to his face. He crept through the halls despised by everyone, a man who had traded every shred of dignity for scraps from another man's table, and he kept doing it because he had already gone too far to stop. When Gandalf finally arrived and broke Saruman's hold, the poison was drawn out of Theoden in front of the entire court. The king rose, stood straight and strong for the first time in years, and looked down at the creeping thing that had done this to him. And here is the strange mercy of it. Theoden did not kill him. He gave Gríma a choice, a chance to ride out and prove himself by taking up a sword in the coming war. Gríma spat at his feet and fled to the only master he had left, crawling north to Saruman. And that was not freedom. Saruman despised him, mocked him, beat him, and kept him as a servant in the most literal and degrading sense, a broken creature absorbing abuse he no longer had the will to refuse. His end came in the ruin of the Shire, at the very doorstep of Saruman's final, petty defeat. Pushed one insult too far at last, Gríma cut the wizard's throat and was shot down in the road moments later, dead in the dirt with nothing left of him to mourn, the Mouth of Sauron. If Gríma shows us a man who was slowly hollowed out by another's will, the Mouth of Sauron shows us a man who did the hollowing himself, deliberately, until the job was complete. He appears near the very end of the War of the Ring, riding out from the Black Gate to meet the captains of the West as they stand before the entrance to Mordor. And he is not a wraith, he is not a demon, he is a living man, and more than that, a black Númenorian, descended from the greatest civilization mortal men ever built, the same noble bloodline that produced Aragorn himself. That is what makes him so unsettling. He came from the top, with every advantage a mortal could inherit, and he threw all of it into the fire willingly. Here is the detail that tells you everything. He entered the service of the Dark Tower so long ago that he has forgotten his own name. Think about what that actually means. Not his home, not his family, his name. The single word a person carries their whole life, worn away by centuries of service, until nothing was left to attach it to. He is known now only by his function. He is the Mouth of Sauron, the voice through which the Dark Lord speaks to the outside world, and that title is the only identity he has left. And he rose to it precisely because there was nothing in him to resist the climb. He learned deep and terrible sorcery. He grew crueler than ordinary men could stomach. He climbed the ranks of Mordor higher than almost any mortal ever had, and in exchange, Sauron stretched his life far past any natural span, keeping him alive across ages, while everyone he might once have loved turned to dust. What separates his betrayal from the Nazgûl standing behind him is the matter of choice. The ring-wraiths were enslaved. They were given rings, and the rings consumed them, and by the end they had no will of their own. No one did that to the Mouth of Sauron. There was no ring on his hand, no curse laid on him from outside, no torture that broke him. He walked into that darkness on his own 2 feet, and he kept walking, day after day, decade after decade, handing over piece after piece of himself, until the man who had been making those choices simply was not there anymore. At the Black Gate, he delivers his master's terms with obvious relish. He produces the belongings of a captured hobbit and gloats over them, trying to break the hearts of the men in front of him with the suggestion that their friend has been tortured to death. He is smug, poisonous, and completely certain of the power standing behind him, what a person becomes when they betray not a king or a city or a friend, but themselves, and go on doing it until there is no one left inside to betray. Celebrimbor. Not every betrayal is committed by the one who suffers for it. Sometimes a person is betrayed, and the whole world nearly pays the price for how completely they were deceived. Celebrimbor was one of the greatest craftsmen in the entire history of the Elves. He came of the house of Fëanor, most often named as his grandson, inheritor of the finest hands and the most brilliant mind of a family famous for both. And in the Second Age, he led the Elven smiths of Eregion, a community devoted to craft at the highest level any elf had ever reached. And into that community came a stranger. He was fair to look upon, generous, wise, and full of knowledge that no one else possessed. He called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he presented himself as an emissary of the valor, the powers of the world, come to share his skill and help the elves make Middle-earth as beautiful as the lands across the sea. It was Sauron. Sauron had not yet revealed his true nature to the world, and he wore that fair form the way a hunter wears the colors of the forest. He came to Eregion and offered Celebrimbor exactly what a master craftsman would find impossible to refuse. Knowledge, techniques of forging beyond anything the elves knew, the chance to make works greater than any that had been made before. And Celebrimbor, trusting, took the offered hand. Together they labored for years, and out of that collaboration came the Rings of Power, the great works into which the elven smiths poured their genius, rings that could preserve and heal and hold back the slow decay of time. Celebrimbor believed he was building wonders, and in secret, Sauron went to the fires of Mount Doom and forged one more ring, the One Ring, into which he poured his own will and cruelty and hunger for dominion, a master ring built to command and corrupt every other ring that had been made. The moment Sauron put it on and spoke the words that bound it to the others, Celebrimbor felt it. He understood, in a single instant, exactly what he had done. He had been used. The fair stranger had been the enemy the whole time, and the beautiful things he had helped to make were now instruments of enslavement, aimed at the entire world. And he did the one thing left to him. The 3 rings, the ones he had made alone, without Sauron's hand on them, were still pure, and Celebrimbor hid them. War came to Eregion. Sauron's armies overran the land, and Celebrimbor was taken. Sauron tortured him without mercy, trying to wring from him the location of the 9 and then the 3. Celebrimbor gave up the 9 under torment, but the 3 he would not surrender, and no agony Sauron devised could make him. So Sauron killed him, and then he did something worse than killing. He had the body of the greatest smith of the age shot through with arrows, and he mounted that corpse on a pole and carried it before his armies as a banner, marching the maker of the rings across the battlefield as a standard of war. The Oathbreakers. Some betrayals do not end with the death of the ones who commit them. Some follow the traitors past the grave and refuse to let them rest. In the years of the last alliance, when elves and men marched together against Sauron for the first time, Isildur went to the men of the mountains and called upon an oath they had sworn. Long before, these men had pledged themselves to fight for the heirs of Isildur's line against the Dark Lord, and now the hour had come to honor that pledge. But there was a stain in their past that they had never confessed. In the dark years, before the alliance, these men had worshipped Sauron. They had bent the knee to him in secret, and now that he had returned, their old fear of him ran deeper than any promise they had made. So when Isildur called, they did not come. They refused the oath, slipped away into their mountains, and left the alliance to fight without them. And Isildur, betrayed at the worst possible hour, laid a curse upon them with the full weight of his royal line behind it. He declared that because they had broken faith, they would never rest until they had fulfilled the oath they swore, not in life and not in death. And the curse held. When the men of the mountains died, they were not released. Their spirits lingered in the hollow dark beneath the peaks, gray and restless and unable to pass on, a dead army with no war to fight and no peace to find. Century after century, they haunted those caverns, bound to a promise they had refused to keep, unable to live and unable to die and unable to rest, for a betrayal committed in a single moment of cowardice. Thousands of years passed. Kingdoms rose and fell in the lands above them, and still they waited in the dark, because only the rightful heir of Isildur could hold them to the oath, and only in the hour of greatest need. That hour came at the very end of the Third Age. Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, walked into the mountain and stood before the dead and named the oath, and called on them to fulfill it at last. They followed him. He led that gray host down out of the mountains and against the corsairs of Umbar, Sauron's allies sailing up the river to fall on Gondor from behind, and the dead swept over them like a tide of terror that no living man could stand against. The fleets were taken, the threat behind Gondor's back broken in a single stroke. And only then, their word finally honored, after an entire age of the world, did Aragorn release them, and the gray host that had betrayed one king was set free by the coming of another, and passed at last out of the world to the rest that had been denied them for so long, the sons of Fëanor. Here is a betrayal that is not one betrayal at all, but a chain of them, stretching across 3 ages of the world and devouring an entire family from the inside. It begins with an oath. When Morgoth stole the Silmarils, the 3 holy jewels that held the last pure light of the 2 trees before he destroyed them, Fëanor, the greatest and most dangerous elf who ever lived, swore a terrible vow. And his 7 sons swore it with him. They vowed to pursue with vengeance and hatred anyone at all, Vala or elf or man, friend or stranger or kin, who took or kept a Silmaril from them. In Tolkien's world, an oath sworn like that, invoking the highest name of all, is not a thing you can set down when you regret it. It binds the soul, it compels, and it does not care what it costs. The sons of Fëanor were not born monsters. Some were noble, some reluctant, and one or two were gentle by nature and hated what the oath demanded of them. But the oath did not release anyone for being reluctant. Again and again, across the long wars against Morgoth, a Silmaril would come into other hands, and the oath would wake and drive them to do the unthinkable. The first time, it drove them to Alcolonde, where they slaughtered their own kin, the Teleri, to seize the ships that would carry them back to Middle-earth. The first time Elf spilled the blood of Elf, staining everything that came after. And it was not the last. When a Silmaril came into the hands of the Elves of Doriath, the sons of Fëanor demanded it, and when they were refused, they came with swords and destroyed that kingdom too. When the survivors fled to the havens of Sirion, and the jewel went with them, the sons of Fëanor came a third time, and Elves, who should have stood together against the dark, butchered one another on the shore over a single stone. Every one of these atrocities was committed by people who, on some level, knew it was wrong and did it anyway, because the oath left them no door out. One by one, the brothers died, most of them by violence, hunting a jewel that brought nothing but ruin to everyone who touched it. And at the very end, when only two were left, they finally got their hands on two of the Silmarils, stolen from the camp of the victorious Valar after Morgoth was overthrown, and the jewels burned them. The holy light that had judged them across 3 ages would not suffer the touch of hands so soaked in the blood of their own people. The pain was unbearable. One brother, in his agony, threw himself into a fiery chasm in the earth and was gone, still clutching the Silmaril that had rejected him. The last brother flung his into the sea and wandered the empty shores alone forever after, singing his grief to the waves, a great lord of the Noldor reduced to a broken figure with nothing left, betrayed most of all by the vow he had spoken with his own mouth. Ar-Pharazôn. The betrayal of Ar-Pharazôn was not aimed at a person. It was aimed at the source of everything, and it took an entire civilization down with it. Numenor was the crown of humanity. After the wars of the First Age, the noblest houses of men were given a great island in the sea as a reward for their loyalty, and there they built a civilization greater than any mortals had ever achieved. They lived for centuries. They mastered the oceans. They raised fleets and cities that made the rest of Middle-earth look primitive, and for a long age they were faithful and wise and good. But a shadow crept in over the generations. The one gift that set men apart, the gift of death, the ability to pass beyond the world entirely to somewhere even the Valar could not follow. The Númenóreans slowly came to see not as a gift, but as a theft. They looked at the deathless elves, and at the undying lands across the sea where no mortal was permitted to go, and they grew bitter. They began to fear death, and then to resent it, and then to hate the powers they blamed for it. And into that bitterness, at the very end, came Sauron. The king of Numenor at this time was Ar-Pharazôn, the proudest and mightiest of them all, a king who had grown so powerful that when he sailed to Middle-earth with his armies, Sauron chose not to face him in battle and instead surrendered himself, a calculated submission rather than a true defeat. Sauron let himself be taken as a captive back to the island, and it was the cleverest thing he ever did. As a prisoner, he rose, slowly, to become the king's most trusted counselor, and he took the fear already festering in the heart of Numenor and sharpened it into a blade. He whispered that death was not a gift, but a lie told by the Valar to keep men in their place, and that the true secret of immortality lay in the undying lands, hoarded across the sea by the powers of the world. And Ar-Pharazôn, old now and terrified of dying, believed him. He committed the ultimate act of rebellion against the order of the world. He built the greatest armada that had ever sailed, a fleet beyond counting, and set out to make war on the undying lands themselves, to storm the shores of the powers of the world and seize deathlessness by force. It was a betrayal of the most fundamental law mortals were given, that this one boundary was never to be crossed. And the answer to it was absolute. When Ar-Pharazôn's boots touched the forbidden shore, the Valar laid down their authority and called upon Ilúvatar, the one god above them all, and Ilúvatar answered directly, as he almost never did. The sea rose up and swallowed Numenor whole, the island, the cities, the people, the pride of an age, all of it dragged beneath the waves and drowned in a single day. And Ar-Pharazôn and the warriors, who had set foot on the shore, met a fate somehow worse than the drowning. The hills fell upon them and buried them alive, entombing them in the caves of the forgotten, where the old tales say they remain imprisoned to this day, neither dead nor free, waiting until the end of the world. Gollum. Some betrayals are aimed at a whole city or a whole people. This one was aimed at a single friend on a quiet riverbank, and it set in motion 500 years of ruin. Sméagol was once an ordinary member of a small river-dwelling folk, close kin to the hobbits, curious and clever and unremarkable. And one day he and his friend Déagol went fishing, and Déagol was pulled into the water and found something lying on the riverbed. A golden ring. The moment Sméagol laid eyes on it, he wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. He asked for it. It was his birthday, he said. Déagol refused, and Sméagol put his hands around his friend's throat and strangled him for it, there on the bank of the river, and took the ring and hid the body. That was the first betrayal, a single murder over a single object, and it was the seed of everything. Because the ring he killed for was the one ring, Sauron's own ring of power, and it did not reward him. It did not make him a king. It kept him alive and alive and alive, long past any natural span, and it used every one of those years to take him apart. His own people cast him out for the poison that grew in him, and he fled under the misty mountains and crawled into the dark, and there he stayed. For over 500 years. His body twisted, his eyes grew large and pale from the endless black. His name fell away, and he became Gollum, called after the wet clicking sound he made in his throat, talking to himself in the dark because there was no one left in the world who would have him. And his mind split in two, into Sméagol, the pitiful remnant of the person he had been, and Gollum, the murderous thing the ring had made, and the two of them fought endlessly for control of a self that no longer belonged to either. He had betrayed his friend for the ring, and the ring betrayed him in turn, giving him 5 centuries of misery and calling it a gift. And when it was finally taken from him, first by Bilbo and then carried toward the one place it could be destroyed, Gollum's whole ruined existence narrowed to a single purpose. He had to have it back. He followed the ring to the very heart of Mordor, and at the last moment, on the edge of the fire that would have ended everything, he committed his final betrayal. He turned on Frodo, the hobbit who had shown him more mercy than anyone in 500 years, and bit the ring from his hand, and in his ecstasy at holding his precious, again he lost his footing and fell, still clutching it, into the fire below. His last betrayal destroyed the ring by accident and saved the world by accident, Saruman. Of all the betrayals in Middle-earth, this is the one that came from the highest place and fell the furthest. Saruman was not a man. He was a Maya, an angelic spirit that existed before the world was made, sent into Middle-earth in the form of an old man for one purpose only, to help the free peoples resist Sauron. He and Gandalf and the others were given no armies and no thrones. They were sent to guide, to counsel, to strengthen the hearts of those who fought the dark, and to do it without seizing power for themselves. That was the entire point of their mission, and Saruman was the greatest of them, the head of their order, the White Wizard, the wisest and most learned, the one the others deferred to. And he studied his enemy too closely. Saruman became fascinated by Sauron, by the rings of power, by the workings of the enemy he was sent to oppose, and somewhere in that long study, his purpose quietly inverted. He began to admire the very thing he was meant to destroy. He told himself that Sauron's victory was inevitable, and that the wise course was to join the winning side and steer it from within, to take power in order to control it. It was the oldest lie there is, and a being who had existed since before the dawn of the world told it to himself and believed it. He built a war machine in the valley of Isengard. He tore down the trees of the ancient forest on his doorstep to feed his furnaces, bred armies of orcs and crossbred Uruk-hai that could march in daylight, and reached out to corrupt the king of Rohan through the whispers of Gríma Wormtongue, planted like a splinter in Theoden's ear. He had been sent to protect the peoples of Middle-earth, and he made war on them instead, all while telling himself he was still, somehow, the wise one. And his fall was total. His armies broke at Helm's Deep. The very forest he had been butchering rose up in the form of the Ents, the ancient tree shepherds, and they came down on Isengard and tore his fortress apart with their bare hands and drowned his industry in a flood. Saruman was left trapped in his tower, and when Gandalf came and offered him a way out, a chance to turn back even now, his pride would not let him take it. So Gandalf broke his staff and cast him from the order, and the greatest of the wizards became a wanderer with nothing. And even then he could not stop. He crept to the one place small enough for his diminished spite, the Shire, the quiet green home of the hobbits, and he took it over and fouled it and cut down its trees for no reason but malice, ruling a handful of gardeners because it was all the power he had left. And there, at the end, his own abused servant Gríma turned on him at last and cut his throat on the doorstep, Doriath. The last betrayal is the one that shows how the noblest intentions can rot into slaughter when greed gets into them, and it destroyed the fairest kingdom of the Elves in Middle-earth. Doriath was the hidden realm of King Thingol and Queen Melian, a vast forest kingdom protected by an enchantment that no enemy could cross, and for most of an age, it stood untouched while the wars of the world raged outside its borders. Its ruin did not come from Morgoth. It came from a jewel, and from the way that jewel woke the worst in everyone who came near it. That jewel was a Silmaril, one of the 3 holy stones, won back from Morgoth's own Iron Crown by the hero Baron and the elf princess Luthien at unimaginable cost. That jewel passed to Thingol, and Thingol wanted it set into a great necklace, a work of surpassing beauty, and so he brought, in the finest craftsmen he could find, the dwarves of Nogrod labored and set the Silmaril into the necklace, and it was the most beautiful thing their hands had ever made. And when they looked at it, finished, they did not want to give it back. They claimed the necklace as their own, arguing that the craft was theirs, and Thingol answered them with pride and scorn, insulting them and casting them out of his halls with harsh words. And that insult, layered on top of the burning desire for the jewel, was enough. The dwarves fell upon Thingol and killed him, the great king of Doriath cut down over a necklace in his own kingdom, and they seized the Silmaril and fled. That was the first blow, but the betrayals came in waves after it, each one feeding the next. The dwarves were pursued and most of them slain, and the necklace recovered. But the killing did not stop there. The enchantment that had protected Doriath, the girdle woven by Queen Melian, fell when she forsook her body and departed Middle-earth in grief for her murdered husband. For she was a Maya, an immortal spirit, and without her the kingdom lay open at last. And then the sons of Fëanor came, bound by their old oath, demanding the Silmaril that now lay within Doriath's borders. And when they were refused, they came with swords, kin against kin, and destroyed what was left of the fairest elven kingdom in the world, elf killing elf in the halls of Menegroth over the same cursed stone that had already killed a king. Doriath, which no enemy of Morgoth had ever breached, which had stood behind its magic for an age of the world, was brought down entirely from within, by greed and pride and an oath, over a single jewel that no one who touched it ever kept for long.